He has called it a right to work for less bill. Senator Ken Kelash is here to explain his thoughts on this legislation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with that thought. You and other opponents do say it's the right to work for less bill. Proponents say that isn't necessarily the case. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that in every state that has had right to work, wages have gone down. The state, the AFL-CIO, has done significant studies on the proposed amendment and what it would do for Minnesota. Average Minnesotans make $5,500 more a year per worker than states that are right-to-work states on the average of those states. The poverty rate in Minnesota is significantly lower compared to the right-to-work states. The dependence on government subsidies for housing, food stamps, etc., health care are all higher in right-to-work states. The direction that this right-to-work states is trying to, instead of taking us to those economies that are growing and expanding, like Massachusetts, which are using the educated workforce and higher wage rates to pay for a higher, more educated workforce. The bill is looking at states like South Dakota and Mississippi that are low-wage states that have higher dependency on the federal government for subsidies, and it's just the wrong direction for Minnesotans.
Well, you briefly touched on that argument that was brought up by both of the bill authors. House author Representative Steve Drazkowski and Senator Dave Thompson both stated that income growth in right-to-work states is higher than in states without this legislation, and you're saying this doesn't have any teeth?
No, a lot of the studies that they're using were flawed. The AFL-CIO put out a great press release on that. They took certain factors that supported their position and not all the factors that were related to work. So that's one. And you can say the trend that may be during this recession, that the trend said the right-to-work states may have been growing, but where did they start from? Low wages in the first place. So they may be growing a little bit because some new BMW in Georgia, for example, creating a factory there brought wages up so much higher, but there's still lower wages than the state of Minnesota. And the ability for folks that get the opportunity to collectively bargain traditionally and have consistently made, 12 to 20% more than folks that don't have the right to collectively bargain.
Well, Senator, the idea of their legislation is to give it to voters to decide. Right. Why do you think this isn't a good idea? Well,
number one is that the language of the bill, calling it a right to work, everybody says, isn't that great? Well, if you get into the details of it, right to work, it's right to work for less. It is providing people with, I have an opportunity to get a free lunch because I can get the benefits of a union without having to pay dues. They say, well, the bill can say that if you don't pay for the union's not obligated, but federal law says that if there's a union, the union is required to represent everybody, whether they're paying dues or not. There's the opportunity for folks that don't want to pay union dues to join a union to pay fair share, which is what it costs the union to represent them. And there's also the ability for someone that doesn't want to join a union to go find another company that doesn't have a union contract. It's not like anybody's forcing them to go to work for a union contractor. What the bill does is it says, if you go to work for a union contractor, you should be able to get a free lunch on the backs of all those people that established the union in the first place in that company, negotiated raises and benefits over extended history, and then also, if there's an issue on that job site, be able to get that service for free. I'd love to go golf at the Edina Country Club, for example, without having to pay membership fees and everything else. And they say that, well, it's not the same thing, but it is the same thing, something for nothing.
What are your concerns if this is indeed passed?
Oh, that Minnesota will go the way of several other right-to-work states, which is wages go down, unions' ability to negotiate fair wages. What do unions do? They negotiate contracts to make sure folks get living wages, they get health insurance, they get pension benefits, and union members aren't a burden on the rest of Minnesota taxpayers. And so what do you do when you take away those things? Then suddenly we need more subsidized housing, we need more government folks that are working are subsidizing food stamps. All of those things have been shown to be an effect. I sat on the housing committee for the Senate, and the people we're subsidizing in housing, the developers say, you know, most of the people in my housing units are working, which means they're not making enough. So why would we make it easier, or make it easier for employers not to pay living wages and then have to use taxpayers to subsidize them?
Senator, we're just about out of time, but it's likely that this will be made a constitutional amendment, put on the ballot at least. It is likely. How do you get your message out there to people?
Well, I think some of it is we'd like to see it not go on the ballot. According to Labor, there's several House members and senators that aren't really in favor of this. Whether or not they're allowed to vote their conscience is going to be one of the issues. The message, if this becomes a constitutional issue, that Labor will do what they did in Ohio, gather together and get the facts out to folks. And I'll be working very hard to make sure that folks realize that this is a right to work for less, that it's not good for Minnesota. It's not just union members, but also non-union members. For the unions getting a decent wage, the competitors of that employer are also paying decent wages so that they can attract good employees.
All right, with those words, Senator, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.